All right. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. So as our introductory slides is here today, our chat box is disabled, but if you have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box, and we will be addressing questions at the end of each section. For session 1 today, first, let's talk a little bit about UF-IFAS extension. So we're doing this class in several different sessions throughout the next 2 months. And we are the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences Extension. So we're extending the information from our land-grant university system into our residential areas here in the county. We're local, state, and federally funded, and we include family and consumer sciences, agriculture, horticulture, and 4-H. UF-IFAS extension is found in all 50 states, and UF-IFAS extension is found in all 67 counties here in Florida. So we're your connection to the researchers at the University of Florida. Your teachers today, first we have Morgan Pinkerton, who is our Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Agent, and she deals with our local farmers as well as our local food system. Then you've got me, I'm Katie McCormick. I'm the Residential Horticulture Agent and the Master Gardener Volunteer Coordinator here in Seminole County. I am in charge of the Master Gardener Volunteers, and if you're interested, we're taking applications right now, as well as outreach into the community on residential horticulture topics. And finally, we have Tina McIntyre, who is our Florida-friendly landscaping agent, and her job is very similar to mine. She's reaching out to the community with Florida-friendly landscaping information, both commercial and residential. And today we'll be learning about Florida-friendly landscaping principles as they connect to growing edibles in your landscape, as well as the selection and care of apples, avocados, and bananas. Our sessions after this will be covering other plants as well. So before we get started, we just wanted to poll you guys. You should be seeing a poll popping up on your screen here. So do you have fruit trees already? Do you use mulch in your landscape? Do you spray pesticides? Go ahead and answer that poll. And yep, a lot of you have already figured it out. So give it a couple more seconds here.
Yep. About another 10 people. Okay, great. And just another few people. It looks like about 75% of you are already growing fruit trees, which is great. Same percentage using mulch, and most of you are not using pesticides on insects that you have not yet identified. So with that, I will end the poll.
Yeah, thanks guys for taking our poll there. Did you want to share results, Tina?
Well, I pretty much went over them, so
okay.
We'll just skip it.
Close it. All right. And then finally, before we get started on our first fruits of the day, I wanted to go over the fact that you guys will be getting an email to our online Canvas classroom. And this will have a recording of our video available for you to review if you want to from today, as well as links to resources from the University of Florida that go even further in depth on how to grow the different fruit trees that we're growing. Also, if you weren't able to sign up for one of the class dates, maybe you signed up for this one, but you aren't able to make one of the ones in the future, or we were already full, you can access the recordings after the fact on this website. So you'll be able to access the full course of materials, even if you aren't able to make the in-person Zoom meetings. With that, I'll pass it over to Tina, actually.
Awesome. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, so we are going to be starting off by learning about Florida-friendly landscaping. So, hello everyone, my name is Tina McIntyre, and we're just gonna kind of go over the 9 principles. So maybe some of you are familiar with the 9 principles, maybe you've taken some classes with us before. But Florida-friendly landscaping looks at kind of the quality of our surrounding water bodies and the quantity of water that we have to use in our landscapes moving forward. So it's a integrated approach that focuses on our landscape so that we can have beautiful yards while still saving money and protecting our environment. So we want to conserve the amount of water that we're using, through our irrigation practices, best management practices, things like that. And we also want to protect our water quality from, over fertilizing and things like that. And you may have attended one of our fertilizer classes or other opportunities to learn about that more in depth. So I just wanted to throw up a quick graphic here that you can see, and this is a graphic from the Central Florida Water Initiative, which is a conglomeration of utility companies and the water management districts throughout all of Central Florida. They come together and they look at real data in terms of what is available in our aquifer, what is available in surface water, and the various ways that we're growing here in Central Florida. And as they look out into 2035, which is only 15 years away, they are predicting that we will have the continued 800 million gallons per day used, but we also are seeing a 250 million gallons per day projected increase, of which water we do not have available in our freshwater aquifer. So that projected amount is really going to focus on conservation. So we all need to do our part to make sure that we're conserving the water that we use on our landscapes, to grow our fruit trees, our landscapes, and otherwise, to make sure that we're good stewards of the water that's remaining in the aquifer, and that we're really implementing and relying on conservation like they're showing in this scientific plan. So Florida Friendly Landscaping does a great job at that. And it all starts with the foundation as right plant, right place. We're going to be going over each and every one of these topics, so I won't go too far into depth, but you can see it touches on the water that you use, the fertilizer, and how you apply it, and that really we do this to protect our waterfront and our watershed. So starting off with right plant, right place, it is, again, the foundation of Florida Friendly. Plants are selected for a specific site. So we're looking at soil testing results to figure out what type of soil we have, what the pH is, and what existing nutrients might be in that soil. We're thinking about the sun and the shade throughout the year and throughout the seasons in our landscape. We're looking at drainage issues and using plants that are resilient to maybe wet areas or dry areas appropriately. We're also selecting low maintenance plants so that we might not have intensive, pruning and mowing and things like that, so that we can, enjoy the atmosphere more. And one thing that really is important and also applies to fruit trees is the mature size when you're selecting your plant. So, a lot of these are going to be trees, but we want to think about what the maximum and mature height of the plant that we're talking about. We don't want to have to, again, come in and constantly prune the tree if it's in a place where it's not going to have enough room to grow. And that's especially prudent for fruit production, because if you're over pruning the tree, then it's going to have some issues with producing proper fruit. Watering efficiently, so it's always best to water in the morning. We have high temperatures, and so that water is going to be subjected to evaporation, and we'd want to just make sure that the plants are able to absorb in their roots whatever water we're giving them. So the wind is typically calmer in the morning, temperatures are cooler, so again, no evaporation is going to be as high as, say, like from a 10 to 2 at the high point of the day. And then 40 to 60% of our water, that is applied in the afternoon tends to evaporate. So, we do not want to be watering after 10 a.m. or before 4 p.m. So setting it for like a 7 a.m. is always best. If you have to, you can do the afternoon as well. It's just, you might get some, increased fungus growth. So we really recommend mornings. And approximately 60% of our home water use does go to our landscape. So, it's important to turn off our when we're brushing our teeth and washing our hands, turn off the spigot, but we really want to be saving and maximizing our conservation efforts in our landscape, because we do use so much water there. So speaking of conservation, we do have some Florida friendly and rules from the Water Management District where in Central Florida we do have to abide by. So right now we're still in that 2 days a week that we're allowed to water. Doesn't mean you might maybe necessarily need to if you have a mature landscape or your deep roots and things like that, a resilient landscape. But you can. So, you know, April through October through the summer, you can do 2 days a week. And then as we move into November at daylight savings time, it goes down to 1 day a week. And that is based on your number of your home. Again, overwatering, we do see a lot of problems associated with that. So we can have, extra weeds, shallow root growth. So we want our trees, our fruit trees and shrubs to get those roots down into the soil, looking for nutrients, looking for water. And if we're constantly applying a little bit of water every day, they're not going to be searching for that. So we want to kind of make sure that we're promoting deep root growth and, that all landscapes with an irrigation system are required to have a functioning rain sensor by law. So if you do have an irrigation system, you have to have a functioning rain sensor. Even better, what the research is showing is soil moisture sensors. So it might be something to consider if you like to get the fun technology for your yard like we do. Fertilizing appropriately. So this is a big one in our county, in Seminole and throughout Central Florida. We actually have a webinar coming up for the 3 counties where we'll, oh, sorry, it went past there, but we actually are not able to fertilize for turf and landscapes from June through September. And that does include an exemption on gardens and fruit trees, but we do need to make sure that we're abiding by that exemption for our landscape and our turf. So if you are fertilizing, and we're coming up here in October, we can start using a nitrogen and phosphorus-based fertilizer. Again, if you get a soil test, you can use phosphorus, but you have to show on your soil test that you do have a need for it. And again, you don't want to waste your money, so a soil test is always the best start. You do want to use a 50, it's actually 65% or more change this year to a slow release nitrogen. And if you're interested, again, we are offering classes where you can get a free bag of fertilizer for Seminole County residents and learn about how fertilizer affects our waterways and how to do it the right way. Mulch, so you can see we put on one of the poll questions because mulch is so important, and it's its own Florida friendly principle because it helps to buffer the soil temperature. Sometimes we have extremes in soil temperature. It inhibits the weed germination. It adds that important organic material to our sandy soils. And, we really recommend that you select things that are kind of byproducts or more sustainable, like pine needles, which is kind of a byproduct of the timber industry, or other types of recycled mulches. I know my neighbor was just getting their limbs on their oak tree, and so I have a nice little mulch mountain just waiting for me to apply to my landscape, and that's a great option. It's free. It's oak, so it's recycled. And then we also recommend avoiding that cypress mulch because when we get hurricanes, our wetlands are so important to our ecosystems, and cypress mulch tends to not be as sustainable. Attracting wildlife. So, you guys, by planting your fruit trees, are doing that just by default. Now, whether you like it or not is another question, but they need food too, and we have to remember that we are growing here in Central Florida, which leaves less room for those critters. And we want to just understand that a pest-free yard or, a mammal-free yard might not be an achievable goal. And another thing as well is to keep in mind is if you're in our bear ordinance area, you want to be really cautious with those fruit trees and selecting those fruit trees because just as we're interested in those fruits, so are the bears. So, we want to attract wildlife. We want to do it in a responsible way. To create habitat, obviously you're going to look for, having a water source. You're going to look for having food. for coverage so that that plant is going to provide habitat, nesting areas. And, you want to start off by having the right plant in the right place. Managing pests responsibly, and we will talk a lot about this throughout our course. We do hope that you can join and view through Canvas each and every one of them. We will, again, want to set realistic expectations. This is Florida. There are a lot of bugs, and it's not practical to say we're going to have a pest-free or insect-free yard. And really, that's not desirable, because some of the bugs, like this ladybug pictured here, they're actually really beneficial to our landscape. So we want to start by scouting, starting with the least toxic method possible, like just pruning the branch off and throwing it away instead of spraying really anything at all, and spot treat if you do have an organism that's a problem. We always also want to encourage recycling yard waste. So that could include composting, but it could include something very easy. Like you could see these pine trees here are just a self-mulching area. So they're just dropping their needles, you rake everything up, and then you get basically a recyclable free mulch that's happening in the landscape. So we think about ways that we can, when we create debris on our landscape, how can we use that in another area of the landscape to create beauty, create more organic material, and really just enhance the landscape overall. And another one that kind of goes with this is building your soil health over time. So you want to make sure that you're using things like organic amendments like compost, mulch, vermicompost. Animal and plant manure are fantastic. I think we have a lot of sources locally for that. And this is going to help your fruit trees and all of your really landscape plants, your turf, everything can benefit from enhanced soil. So we got more worms, more good fungus and good bacteria, and it helps with that water and nutrient absorption. And again, the reason why we have the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program statewide and here in Seminole County is because we want to prevent stormwater runoff. So everything that we do in our yard and landscape affects our local water bodies. And in Seminole County, we are lucky enough to have the treasured National Wild and Scenic River, which is a precious national resource. And the St. Johns River as well, a nice historical resource. So, when we put excess nutrients on our lawn, it can lead to excess aquatic and algae growth. And then over time, it can lead to fish kills. And then, our recreation gets inhibited, as well as, fishing, and that is a water resource. So we want to just be mindful when we're using these powerful tools like fertilizer. One thing to keep in mind is to leave those grass clippings on your yard. Again, compost them, use them. They are fantastic for organic material. And just to kind of show you how a watershed functions, which many of you might already know, but as it rains, it washes out all of the things throughout our watershed. And that could be in a residential environment, excess fertilizers, or an industrial landscape might be more those toxic organic materials. And so, or potentially in a farm, you might have excess manures. And, when we think about pollution, a lot of people like to say, well, I'm not responsible, but, we all can do our part to make sure that we're not creating more pollution for our beautiful water bodies. And then if you do happen to live on waterfront, which would be a lake, river, stream, stormwater pond, you want to make sure that you're maintaining a 15-foot buffer zone between the landscape and the shoreline. This is in the Florida code that it's a recommended, buffer zone, and there is by law no fertilizing within that zone, even if you have a fruit tree. So you want to just be mindful that if you do have bananas really close to the water body, you're not going to be able to fertilize them because of the Florida law, and the Seminole County law. We do want to be vegetating those areas, however, so we don't want to be mowing right up to our watersheds, our water bodies. We want to make sure that we're vegetating them so that we can provide, nutrient sequestration. We can provide habitat, prevent erosion, and get all those wonderful benefits. So again, with the low maintenance zone, You can have 10 to 15 feet and then no fertilizing within 15 feet of any water body in Seminole County. So with that, I will check out the question and answer to see if we have anything. And
we've got two. So first, Marty says you aren't supposed to fertilize 24 hours before a rain event. Doesn't fertilizer have to be watered in?
correct.
And can't the rain help with that?
So we don't want to use the rain to water in our fertilizer. We want to use the hose or the irrigation system to provide only a 1/4 inch. So it's just a light application of water to kind of get those granules into the sod or, the landscape. With heavy rains, especially these summer storms, we're not going to get a 1/4 inch. We're going to get a deluge of water. And so we want to make sure that we're not washing away our expensive fertilizers into our stormwater ponds and our lakes. So we don't recommend, it's actually prohibited by law in Seminole County that you cannot fertilize within 24 hours of a rain event. So you want to make sure that you're checking the weather before you get that bag of fertilizer out. And next question is a retention pond a water body? That is correct. So in the Seminole County law, it is considered just like a lake, river, or stream. And then no coming up classes on composting. However, we have been chatting about it. So keep tuned in. And applying mulch year after year leads to high soil levels. Is there a way to reduce this? You can kind of till it into the soil. Typically mulch will settle. You might want to select a different type of mulch. Like I've noticed the pine needles will settle a little bit more than like your wood or your pine bark type mulches. So maybe select a different pine needle mulch to be able to have it settle a little more. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie so we can stay on time, and I'll answer any more questions through text.
All right, so next section we're going to be doing is apple tree management. And let's just get right into that. So first, apple trees are originally native to Central Asia, and you can find the original apples, which...
Katie, can you swap your screens?
Yeah.
We have your presenter view.
How's that?
That's good, thanks.
Cool, thanks, Morgan. They grow in USDA hardiness zones 3 to 9. And the varieties for north central Florida include Anna, Dorset Golden, Tropic Sweet, and Ein Shemmer. For our part of Florida, you're probably best off with Anna, Dorset Golden, and Tropic Sweet. If you're a little bit more north, you could get away with Ein Shemmer and some other varieties. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is later. For size, typical apple tree, if you're pruning it correctly, is going to be 12 to 15 feet in height and spread. Typically, they're going to take about 2 to 5 years to produce fruit, and they require 2 different varieties to fruit well in general. So if you're going to grow apples at all, you typically need to do one of each variety that grows here in Central Florida. And apples are pomes, which means that they have a cluster of seeds in the center of the fruit there, surrounded by all that apple flesh. The reason that we're going to get into why apples may or may not do super well here in Seminole County now, we'll be talking about in a minute. But first, they require full sun, and morning sun is preferred because your apples can be burned by afternoon sun here in Central Florida. They have a low tolerance to drought. They need regular watering to grow well, but they also require well-drained soils, which with our sands is usually not an issue. And then for their chill hour requirement, the lowest chill hour requirement on apple trees is 250 hours. A lot of them are 300 or more. For an explanation on chill hours are the timekeeping device for deciduous plants. And these are hours under 45 degrees, but above 32 degrees. And the plant is keeping track of these over the course of a winter time. And once it meets the requirement that it has for chill hours, it's able to come out of dormancy, start fruiting and flowering and leafing out. Unfortunately, here in Central Florida, historically, we would typically get 300 hours, which would be fine for these low chill apple varieties. Last year, though, we got 169 hours, and this year, over our winter season, we had 84 hours of chill, which means that spring is never coming for the plants that require more chill, and eventually they're going to go into decline because they don't have the right response to our weather changing. So if you're going to try and grow apples in Central Florida, here in Seminole County, they may be out of our abilities at this time if the weather keeps up with this trend of continuing warming. If you're more North Florida, you could probably grow apples still. It's pretty easy to check your chill hours for your area, and I have the link to the website where you can check these charts on our Canvas website. So you can check out chill hours pretty easily and decide if apples are right for you. For apple propagation, apples are grafted to a rootstock to improve health, and we already talked about the 2 varieties that do really well for North Central Florida, maybe not for Seminole with those chill hours, which are Dorset Golden and Anna. Grafted varieties can be purchased from plant nurseries, and you will find apple trees for sale at nurseries, even with the change in weather leading to them maybe not doing super well here in Seminole County. Planting from seed is definitely not recommended. A lot of the apple seeds that you're going to get are from apples that require higher chill hours to actually do anything. So they might sprout, you might get them growing for a couple of years before they go into decline because we just don't have a cold enough, long enough winter here in Central Florida. For apple planting here in Central Florida, you can plant them anytime. As long as you're willing to water them once they're planted, it's fine to plant them if they've got leaves on them. It's fine to plant them when they're dormant. In other locations, typically you plant any kind of deciduous tree in its dormant season. We want to plant at grade or 10% above grade, and that's just to make sure that our trunk flare is above the surface of the soil. And then you want to water in well for the first 1 to 2 months, just to make sure that that root system gets established. For apple pruning, we prune in the dormant season, and that's mostly so you can keep track of where the branches are and get a really good view of how the plant is growing. You want to grow for a modified central leader system, so we're keeping them a little bit shorter, but also pruning for that Christmas tree shape over time, which you can see in our pictures here. Choosing for branches that are evenly spaced around the trunk. And if the tree does not have an extremely wide set to those branches, you can use wire to actually alter the shape of the branches to give it that really open canopy, as opposed to a more normal upright canopy, which we would see on our shade trees. And that more open canopy allows for better airflow, so you're going to get less fungal diseases. It also allows for the upper canopy to shade the fruit beneath it, so you're less likely to get scorched apples from our sunshine. For fertilization and irrigation, you can use a 10-0-10 fertilizer on apples. You want to use 1 pound of this mixture for each year of the tree's age. So if you have a 2-year-old tree, you're using 2 pounds of fertilizer divided between 2 different applications. Your first application, so again, if we're talking about a 2-year-old tree, you'd be applying 1 pound between January and March, and then 1 pound sometime in June. You want to broadcast the fertilizer evenly beneath the tree canopy. And for Florida, our optimum fertilizer application rates haven't been researched. So this is just a standard recommendation for all of the United States. For irrigation, you want to irrigate either once a week or once every 2 weeks once your tree is established. Getting it established, again, you're watering just about every day for a young tree. For our pests, apple pests include rabbits, which can actually girdle the trunk of your tree. So you may need to put some wire protection up around the trunk of the tree to keep them from nibbling on the wood there. Scale insects, which you can see in this bottom picture here. Plum curculios, which is this little beetle here. Stink bugs, which do this kind of damage on your apples here, and mites. For mites and for scale insects, something like a horticultural soap spray or an oil spray can really help to mitigate them on your plants. Both of those work by either pulling away the waxy coating on the insect and allowing them to desiccate or dry out, or they work by plugging up the breathing tubes on the side of their bodies. For our plum curculios, your best bet is to actually shake the tree early in the morning, put a sheet down on the ground and collect them, and then put them into a bucket of soapy water to drown. Same with our stink bugs. There are different insecticidal sprays you can use for these as well. They're a little harsher though, things like 7. And those will be used whenever we don't have our beneficial insects out during the daytime. So you'd want to use them either in the evening or very early morning before our bees are out and could be affected by them. Next are our apple pathogens. First here, I'm going to talk about the ones where there's nothing you can do, which is Botrosphaeria canker, mushroom root rot, and fire blight. So there's no spray you can actually use for any of these 3 diseases. For Botrosphaeria and fire blight, the recommendation is if these show up in your tree, you need to go in and cut beneath where the damage is showing by about 6 to 8 inches. And you're just cutting out that disease and removing it. You should be throwing that in the garbage or burning it. It should not go in your compost bin. For things like apple scab and bitter rot, there are fungicides that you can use, as well as increasing airflow in general to the area to reduce the amount of fungal pressure on the plants. For mushroom root rot, there's no satisfactory chemical control. A lot of times this is something where if the tree gets it, it's in an area that's staying too wet anyway. And so you need to either mitigate the issue that is making this area so wet by stopping watering practices, or perhaps this wasn't the right plant for the right place in this part of your yard and it's just too wet to actually sustain an apple. Any questions on apple trees? Again, with our warming atmosphere, probably not the best thing to grow in this part of Central Florida. You might still be able to get away with them in North Central Florida and North Florida at this point, but they are sold at nurseries here, so you should know about them.
Yeah, Katie, I actually see a question in the Q&A that I wanted to just pull this up real quick because they were asking about a new map, and I think they're referring to the NOAA map. And so typically we use the USDA cold hardiness zone map, and but NOAA has come out with another map that does take into account more projections. So the biggest difference is the USDA uses data from the past, and the NOAA uses data projected out into the future. And you can see that in Central Florida, there is kind of a bit of a change going from zone 9 to 10, which means much more warm. Now this is 2040, so we're talking 20 years out. But if you're talking the life of a fruit tree, it is around the corner. So it's something to keep in mind.
Yep.
We can't see that screen if you were sharing something.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me share it real quick so you guys can see it. How about now?
Yep, there it is.
Okay, thank you, Morgan. Yeah, so you can see 2000 for Florida moving into 2010 and then 2040. So you can see it moves from a zone 9 to a zone 10 in parts of Volusia. And again, this is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is not the USDA. It's different, but they both have put out maps and projections.
All right. David asked, what is considered a rain event? When it rains, David. You can always track how much water was actually put down, though, and take that into account when you're considering if you're going to water or not. If we just get a quick sprinkle where you're getting very little rain, you might still need to water at that point, as opposed to the inundations we've been getting recently. All right, that one's done. Does UF officially recognize the reality of climate change, and is the reduced number of chilling hours in recent years believed to be just an outlier? Is it possible we may be moving from zone 9B into more of a zone 10 climate? Tina kind of answered that one with the map that she just put up. We do also offer climate smart Floridian classes around the state through UF IFAS. The use of gibberellic acid to replace fertilization. I'm not sure on the research on that one, so I can't really answer it. We use gibberellic acid for a lot of other things with plants, but I don't know that it's been researched for apple trees in Florida, unfortunately. All right. Now on to avocados. And let me start sharing my screen again. Oh, when to prune apple trees? Do they fruit on new or old wood? You should prune apple trees when they're dormant because that's going to be the easiest time to actually see what you're doing when you're pruning. And on new or old wood, no. Let me check my notes here. I would assume on new wood if we're pruning when they're dormant, Beth, but I'm not sure for sure on that one. Send me an email and I'll tell you for sure. All right. Are you seeing my presenter view or my regular view?
That sounds good.
Okay, cool. Let me minimize that. All right, so next we're going to go into growing avocados. Avocados are native to tropical America. They grow in USDA hardiness zones 8 to 11. There are many different varieties you can find sold in the nursery industry. They're broken into subgroups, the Mexican types, the Guatemalan types, and the West Indian types. The Mexican and Mexican hybrids are going to be the best in Central Florida because they are the most cold tolerant. Mexican and Mexican hybrid types are going to be Brogdon, Edinger, Gainesville, Mexicola, and Winter Mexican. If you really like a Hass avocado, Brogdon's going to be probably the closest you can get to that for Central Florida. They grow quite large. Your avocado tree is going to be anywhere between 30 to 65 feet and with a 30-foot or more spread on it. So these turn into really large fruit trees. It usually takes 3 to 5 years for a grafted variety of avocado to produce, and those varieties that were recommended are going to be grafted avocados. And just fun fact, avocados are berries. For our cold sensitivity, this is the reason why the Mexican and Mexican hybrids are the recommended ones for Central Florida. West Indian types will take damage at 30 degrees, 25 to 30 degrees. Guatemalan varieties are going to take damage between 24 and 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Mexican types are going to be taking damage between 18 to 26 degrees. So for cold sensitivity, if you're worried about that, the Mexican varieties are going to be your best bet. They do require full sun to grow well. Avocado takes a lot of energy to produce, so the more sun, the better. They do not want to go into drought conditions, and they also don't want to be in extremely wet conditions. If we're too wet, you're going to have root rot problems on avocados. One interesting thing you need to keep in mind whenever you're choosing your avocados is that they typically need 2 different types of trees to produce well. If you have neighbors that have avocados, you are probably fine. If you walk around your neighborhood and you spot an avocado within a block or 2 of your house, you're probably fine. But if there are no avocados in your neighborhood, you're going to need to either convince a neighbor to plant one with you or plant 2 of these huge trees in your yard. A and B trees are different than a male and female tree. With our A and B trees, the trees are opening their male and female flowers at different times of the day. And if you don't have a good overlap, you're not going to get the best pollination on them. And that means poor fruit set down the road. We'd like to have a lot of avocados if we're growing an avocado tree. So again, if you're going to grow avocado, make sure you either have avocados in your neighborhood already, or be prepared to either convince a neighbor to plant one with you or plant 2 of these trees in your yard. For our pruning practices, you want to prune for good structure. And again, this is trying to prune for a central leader system where we have plant branches evenly spaced around the whole tree. If you want to try and keep your avocado smaller, 65 feet is kind of hard to harvest from. You can go in and carefully take out these larger branches and cut them back to a shorter lower branch, allowing that lower branch to become the new leader. You shouldn't do this when your tree has reached 65 feet. You should be maintaining it around the height that you want each year by going in and making these judicious pruning cuts where you're taking a larger limb back to a smaller limb, thinning it. You don't ever want to just go in and lop it off at a random location. That's going to lead to a whole bunch of water sprouts coming up, similar to these shoots. And those are going to have a weak connection and be less able to bear fruit on them. So if you're going to prune them, you want to prune them back to another limb to keep it short. You shouldn't be keeping them 5 feet short though. So we want to make sure that we're allowing our tree to grow to a size where it can actually produce fruit. You could probably keep it safely around 20 feet or so though by pruning back to those lower branches with those thinning cuts. For our fertilization on these avocado trees, young trees should be fertilized several times throughout the year with small amounts of fertilizer. So in year 1, you're fertilizing 6 times, but total fertilizer you're putting down for the whole year is only 3 pounds. So you're breaking that into extremely small amounts of fertilizer to help feed it throughout the year. As we get up to older trees, you can cut that down to 4 times a year. And again, you're only putting maybe 5 pounds down for each fertilizer event, which equals 20 for the whole year, but you're giving it just a little bit of food at a time. You want to broadcast it beneath where the canopy is to make sure that your roots are taking up the fertilizer. For nutritional sprays, which are also recommended, you're doing these nutritional sprays several times a year on the same schedule as your granular fertilizer. And these are giving it micronutrients. So these will contain things like zinc, manganese, boron, molybdenum, and also oftentimes they'll contain iron. So those should also be done to help keep your avocado at optimum health. You want to irrigate regularly during dry periods, particularly between when the plant is blooming and when you're actually harvesting that fruit. You don't want to stress your tree out when it's trying to produce fruit because it might abort those fruit. So make sure that you're watering regularly during dry periods. A dry period is if we go without rain for 5 or more days, you should probably be putting some water down on your tree. For our avocado pests, first, animals like squirrels and raccoons are going to be interested in your avocados. There's not too much you can do about these guys other than make your yard as unfriendly as possible. For my yard, when I'm trying to keep squirrels and birds out of my fruit trees, I just let my dog run around and bark at them, and that's slightly effective. You can also do things like bagging your fruit to keep them from getting to it. Once an avocado tree has grown large though and is producing really well, you can probably spare some fruit to the squirrels. So minor pest with that guy. Other minor pests are avocado lace bugs, red-banded thrips, our scale insects, and avocado red mites. All of these are pretty minor, especially on a large tree. If you have these guys, they're not doing a whole lot of damage, so you can typically ignore them. On a younger tree where you don't have as many leaves to spare, something like a horticultural soap spray or oil spray is going to take care of these guys pretty easily. Finally, the largest pest problem that we have in Florida are our red bay ambrosia beetles. And these guys can kill a tree, and there's really not much you can do other than keep your tree healthy to try and mitigate that. So the red bay ambrosia beetle is a boring beetle, and it bores into the trunk of your tree. It's an ambrosia beetle because it actually carries the spores of a fungus on its body and inoculates the tree with that fungus so that it can then eat the fungus. Unfortunately, that fungus is eating your tree to help feed these beetles. So over time, your tree goes into decline because the fungus is actually eating it from the inside out, along with the beetles eating the fungus. You can tell that you have these beetles if you see something like the sawdust frass castings that we're looking up here at the top. Your tree will also just start getting reddish brown leaves as it goes into decline and isn't able to move nutrients around because of all the damage internally. So again, for the guys on the right side of the screen here, horticultural oil spray or soap spray if they are a big problem on your tree. Otherwise, you can typically ignore them. For the ambrosia beetles, just try to keep your tree as healthy as possible with a good fertilizer and irrigation schedule and hope that you don't get them. For our pathogens, for avocado pathogens, the best control of fungal pathogens occurs before the symptoms ever show up. So first, again, making sure your tree is really healthy. But then if you have these pathogens, using a fungicide after they've showed up is not going to be a lot of help. You need to keep in mind next year when we're going into the season where you start seeing these pathogens that it's time to spray a fungicide. So first we've got Cercospora spot, which affects the fruit, makes it look less attractive, and can be an entry point for some of our other funguses as well. Then we've got our avocado scab. Again, it makes the fruit look really unattractive. For avocado scab, most avocados grown in Florida are resistant to it other than lula. So as long as you don't get lula, you probably are not going to see a lot of avocado scab. And that's just picking the right plant for our right place here in Florida. Next, we've got anthracnose. Typically, this is a secondary problem. So if your fruit gets damaged, either by mechanical damage or by one of these other funguses, then the anthracnose can actually enter and start rotting your fruit. It's something that you see once the fruit is already reaching the ripening stage, not whenever it is first greening and starting out. We've got our avocado root rot. This usually occurs whenever your plant is in an area that is too wet. Almost every avocado tree in Florida actually has this fungus in the soil around its roots. It's just if we stay inundated for too long and there's flooding that you really see it start to actually hurt the plant. Next, we've got algal leaf spot. And this one's a pretty minor problem. It's actually a parasitic algae that grows on the leaf, but this is one that we actually see here in the office quite often. People will find this on their leaves and bring it in. A lot of times it's not doing enough damage that you need to spray for it, but a copper fungicide would work just fine to get rid of that. And that's what I've got for you guys. So any questions on avocados? Let me stop my share there. Answered that one. Why did my avocado have a big black spot and then split open here in Broward? Was it a big black spot on the trunk? Because that could be a fungal disease. A lot of these ones that affect the fruits will also, if the avocado isn't doing well, affect the twigs and branches of the tree as well. So it could have been a fungal problem, or it could have been that mushroom root rot where it's actually rotting it out. Do a seed-grown avocado need grafting to be able to fruit? So when you grow avocados from seeds, you are really possibly thinking far into the future, because an avocado grown from seed is going to fruit anywhere between 5 years to never years. I would recommend trying to graft onto those with a known variety as opposed to waiting for it to actually produce. How close to the house can an avocado tree be planted? For large shade trees and for something large like an avocado tree, I would plant it at least 15 feet away from your house. 20 feet would be a little bit safer though. Okay, so the avocado black spot was on your fruitly, then it was probably one of those fungal diseases. It might have even been multiple fungal diseases at that point, but it and usually occurs when there's already been some kind of damage to allow it to get into the fruit. How do I know when it's time to pick up my Florida avocado? So on your avocado tree, you actually need to go by the dates that IFAS recommends. It'll be variety dependent. Otherwise, you can just pluck them off and see if they actually ripen after you've plucked them off and gauge it off of that. What would be a good choice for zone 10B? In zone 10B, you should be able to get away with any of the varieties that grow here in Florida. So you could do the Guatemalan or the Mexican or the West Indian. Any of those would be fine. And on our Canvas website, I have the link to the avocado growing document where they list all of the varieties for Florida and base them off of what type they are. And yep, I thought so too, Lee. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Morgan now.
Alrighty, so let me get my PowerPoint pulled up here. All right, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about banana production and IPM, which we talked a little bit about IPM earlier, but this is integrated pest management. And I like to think of it like a toolbox. So we have all these tools in order to solve our plant problems. And I'll get a little bit more into how we approach that with banana. So to start off, bananas are native to Southeast Asia, though they are grown in a lot of different parts of the world, including here in Florida. There's a lot of production in South America, and I actually had a chance to work on a banana plantation in South America for a little bit. So I learned a little bit about it, but we do have the ability to grow quite a few banana varieties here in Florida. Some of these are called ice cream, double Mahoy, Cavendish, and dwarves. Bananas can get fairly tall. They're anywhere between 10 to 30 feet. So this is a pretty tall tree. However, the spread is not necessarily as wide as some of our other fruit trees. You'll see them ranging from about—
Morgan, you're not sharing your screen.
Let's see here. Okay, let's try resharing and see if that works.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, so
but we're in the wrong view. Switch it to the other view.
Were you guys able to see the first couple slides or no?
No.
Okay, I'll go back then. So here's what I was mentioning about bananas being native to Southeast Asia. The four types of banana, the varieties that we have here in Florida, are going to be ice cream, double Mahoy, Cavendish, and dwarves. Like I was mentioning, bananas can get fairly tall, though they're not as wide as some of our other fruit trees. They can get to up to 15 feet across, though they are fairly narrow in many cases. Once you plant a banana tree, you can expect to have flowers at least, or maybe even fruit production in about 10 to 15 months. So they are a fairly quick growing producer of fruit. And kind of like we saw with our last plant, our bananas are also berries. And then bananas, as I had kind of already talked about, you do see bananas produced in very tropical areas. So they do like the warm climate. However, once we get down into our colder temperatures, it's really easy to damage them. So 32 degrees Fahrenheit, about when it starts to freeze or we have a frost, it will damage the plant if they're not properly covered. And then 28 degrees will actually kill the plant. They are full sun plants. However, they can survive in some partial shade. They won't produce as many bananas or be as sweet, so the fruit won't be as of good quality in shade. So they are preferred to plant them in full sun. And again, back to our tropical kind of climate for bananas, the drought tolerance is very low. They do require a lot of water. However, they do not require flooding. They need to be well-drained soils, otherwise there can be potential problems with the trunk rotting or them not producing very well. So bananas are propagated a little bit differently. They are often propagated with what we call suckers. And the suckers, they will sprout out along your main.
You are still on your first slide, Morgan. Maybe I should open up the slideshow and you just tell me when to move.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. I think I'm having computer issues again.
All right, 1 second. Let me pull up that PowerPoint. All right, are we seeing it?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And we are, tell me when to stop.
We can just quickly go through that last slide again, looking at
that one.
Yeah, looking at our cold requirements. As I mentioned before, the cold will damage the plants. They are tropical. They prefer full sun, but they can survive in partial shade. And then they do not handle drought very well, but they also need to be well-drained soils, so flooding can cause problems. So you want to go to the next slide? All right, so here's what I was talking about where we propagate them a little bit differently. We have what we call suckers, and they will sprout up alongside of our main tree. And you can have a water sucker or a sword sucker. And then we also have a different kind of sucker that isn't yet determined whether or not it's going to be a water or sword. You can see from this image here that our sword suckers have very, very robust root systems. So they are going to be the easiest to transplant and to be able to use as our propagation material, whereas our water suckers have very few roots and they won't likely grow as well. So when you're propagating out from any trees that you already have, you're going to want to use that sword sucker to begin with. For commercial production, they do actually use tissue culture, and this is so that they're able to have sterile plants and that they won't have any pathogens that they can transfer as we're doing this propagation with the suckers. So it's a little bit different for more wide-scale production. Next slide. All right, so here's another image of the water sucker and the sword sucker. You can see the water sucker is more low to the ground. It has bigger, wider leaves in that sense, and our sword sucker kind of pops up and has a little bit taller leaves growing. And for planting these, you're going to want to plant in June throughout most of Florida. And in South Florida, you can get away with planting earlier in March or May, but this is only if you're able to irrigate. Because in March and May, we don't tend to have quite as much rainfall events as we would later in the summer. But if you are able to irrigate, or we are having quite a few rain events in South Florida, you can plant earlier because of the warmer climate there. Next slide. So when we talk about pruning bananas, we also go back to thinking about our suckers and our propagation material. The bananas have what we call a pseudostem, and that's your big main branch. And so what'll happen is you have other stems, pseudostems, start to come off of that main tree, and then your suckers are also pulling off from this main tree, and they kind of go out to the side of where this main pseudostem is. So you can see here from our picture, our orange arrow, that's our main pseudostem, and then we have our half-grown pseudostem to the right with the blue arrow, and then our green arrow, which you can't see too well, but there's going to be a sucker popping up in that area. So if you move to the next slide, we'll talk about when you're supposed to be cutting these down. When your bananas are starting to produce, you can go ahead and cut off that bottom flower. So after you see the bananas already producing, like here in the top of the photo, this male flower is no longer needed to produce the bananas. So you can cut that off and it'll speed up the development of the fruit. And then when you harvest your bananas, after you cut the whole branch of bananas off, you are also going to cut off that main pseudostem. So once that pseudostem produces bananas, it is no longer going to produce bananas anymore. So that's when, if we go back to our last slide, we go to that half-grown pseudostem, that is going to be the next one that's producing our bananas. So in the plantations, for a lot of bananas, they actually say that the bananas are walking because over time they start to move over to the side little by little after each harvest. So the original plant is going to be further away than the plant that's on the end after years and years of harvesting from this. So you can move on to the next slide. All right. So here in Florida, bananas do often require fertilizer. The main nutrients that we're focused on are an NPK and magnesium, so nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and magnesium. And we do give them small amounts of fertilizer throughout the year. Typically, it's recommended to use a 6-to-12 fertilizer. And more information will be on this in the Canvas page if you're curious. When you first have a young banana tree, you're going to want to start with about a half a pound every 2 months of fertilizer, and then you will eventually work up to more as that plant gets more mature and more likely to produce bananas. And for wide-scale production of bananas, we also use nutritional sprays of manganese and zinc, at least one every year. And then if you aren't using any fungicides, it's also recommended to include copper in that. But again, more information on this type of fertilization is in the documents in our Canvas page. Irrigation, we talked a little bit about this already. Bananas do like water, and they need at least 4 to 6 inches of water per month. But they can be easily damaged by flooding. So flooding will often cause them to topple and fall over because they can't withstand all that water in the base of the trunk. So go to the next slide. One of the major pests of bananas are actually weeds, and that is because the weeds will compete for the nutrients in the soils. It's recommended that you maintain at least 2 to 6 feet around the banana plant of weed-free. And when you have a banana plant in your home landscape, you're able to mulch around the tree to help leave that area weed-free. However, you don't want to, as we mentioned before, form a volcano or a mound around the tree. You want to leave 2 to 6 inches of space around the base of the tree, so this blue circle here, and then the rest of your mulching area is going to be this larger 2 to 6 feet that you can see in orange. It is really important not to use systemic herbicides near your plant because they can easily take those up and it will kill your banana plant. So move on to the next slide. So some of the pests of banana are, in many cases with our pests, we try to use preventative methods for banana. So we will obtain disease or pest-free propagation material as kind of our first step. But some of the main pests are the sugarcane weevil and the banana borer that you can see here on the left, those two. These will bore into the pseudostems and kind of chew their way around through there. And it eats out the insides and the vascular tissues of the plant, which can cause it to be more susceptible to secondary pathogens and rot or fall over. And then we have nematodes that are another problem in banana. The burrowing nematode and the spiraling nematode are the two primary ones, and they cause what we call is toppling disease. You can see in the picture here on the right, the banana trees actually fall over, and that's because the root system is basically destroyed by the nematodes feeding. And again, we talk about preventative methods for this. You want to have disease-free propagation material and pest-free propagation material. And for the case of nematodes, you can hot water treat the roots in a way so that you're not transporting nematodes to new locations as you move your plants. And then with our sugarcane weevil and our banana borer, it's recommended if you have a heavily infested pseudostem or something like that, that you remove it so that they don't continue to develop and produce more for your future banana trees. So move on to the next slide. Our two primary pathogens that we see here in Florida are Cicotoga leaf spot, which is a Cercospora, which we mentioned Cercospora on avocado as well, and then Panama disease, which is a Fusarium. These two pathogens are, again, we want to think about preventative treatment for them. So we want to prevent the introduction of them to our area to begin with. But if they are known to be in our area, you can see on Panama disease, you get this yellowing and then the vascular tissue kind of is brown inside the pseudostem. And then on Cicotoga leaf spot, you get these necrotic lesions surrounded by yellowing. For Cicotoga leaf spot, one of the management or the cultural control practices that is typically used for that is just removing infected leaves. And in large scale plantations, what they'll do is they will cut the leaf and flip it upside down so that those spores aren't released back into the environment. But if you only have a couple trees, it would be a lot better for you to collect the leaves and destroy them to remove any chance of propagation of the fungus spreading. And again, with Panama disease, once you get Panama disease, there isn't really much we can do. There is no fungicides that can be used once it is infected. And the only thing you can do is to remove the tree from there. And so I move on to our last slide, I believe. And I'll go ahead and answer some questions now. Again, I apologize for the technical errors. Hopefully that's not something that happens again in the future. But we have a question. Can you address truly tiny banana if not in lecture? So that is something that I'm not familiar with right off the top of my head. I don't know if maybe anyone else here is.
Grown them. They didn't actually produce any bananas for me, but they were really cute in the pot I had them in. I've known people that said they did get bananas off them and they were decent bananas, but taste-wise, I can't vouch for them because I haven't tasted them. I grew it mostly as an ornamental, I guess, because mine never produced in the pot I had it in.
Thanks, Katie. Do we see any of those pests in Florida? So yes, those pests that are listed are ones that we can potentially see in Florida. Personally, I've had banana trees in the backyard for quite a few years, and I haven't seen any of them to a degree that I was worried about. Even if they were there, I didn't notice them. But it's highly dependent on where in the state you're located and if there's a lot of other bananas nearby. And can you use ash from the fireplace after cooled to put around the banana tree base? That's not something that I would particularly recommend doing. Katie, do you have any comments on that?
Nope, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, no, that's not something I've ever heard of, and I would not recommend it unless you find scientific material that says otherwise. And then we had a question, destroy how, when we're talking about removing any fungal infected or pest infected pseudostems, the best way to do that would be to completely remove them from the area. You can have them collected as yard waste. If it's a large pseudostem, you would want to cut it up into smaller pieces before removing it. It's not going to burn very well because it is a very wet and fluid tree, and the leaves themselves are that way too. So unless they dry out, it's going to be very difficult to burn them. How close to the house can it be planted? So this is a question I don't know the answer to off the top of my head. They do get very tall, so I wouldn't put them too close to your house. Katie, do you have any comments on that?
From a, is this going to hurt my foundation standpoint? Bananas don't have a root system like a regular tree. So you could plant them pretty close. It's not like an avocado tree where it's like 20 feet would be a good idea. I've seen them planted right up against a house, but that is a way for pests to get into your house. They can use it as a bridge to get to your roof. So it's mostly, do you want this to be a pest highway or not? If you don't mind that maybe bugs are using this to get into your house, you could have it right up against your house. It's not going to structurally harm your house. But typically I would recommend probably 5 to 10 feet away just to give it a little bit of room between plant and house just to keep those bugs from getting in.
And so we have a question about the development of bananas from plant to table, how to go from green to yellow. So when you are harvesting bananas, I believe that it's recommended that you harvest them green and then you let them ripen off of the tree. There's a couple reasons for that. A lot of times animals will steal them if they are starting to ripen on the tree. But you do want to pick them at a different time depending on the variety that you have, and the information that's going to be on the Canvas site, it will include this information. So it's been said the best ripening technique is to keep them kind of in a cool and dry place. But again, it's not going to hurt. I harvested bananas a couple weeks ago, and we just had them in the garage when they were ripening, and they turned out just fine. But that cool environment is supposed to allow the sugars to develop a little bit better, so they might be a little bit sweeter of a fruit. What's the
We're
best?
way over time now, so let's answer one more, and then if you guys still have questions, you can email us afterward or use the Canvas site to ask them as well.
That's true. So there is something that I do want to go over. If you are interested, if you are a pesticide applicator and interested in receiving CEUs for attending today, we do have a survey for you to fill out. Anyone who attended today is able to fill out the survey, and we highly encourage it. And I will go ahead and send everyone the link to that right now. But again, if you are looking for CEUs, you have to fill out this survey. But everyone, please fill out the survey. This will help us with our reporting as well as make us better teachers in the future.
Yes, we need you all to fill out the survey, and we'll keep pestering you a couple times. So just do it now. It's always better. We want to always be improving our classes.
Okay, so you should see the link in the chat box. And again, if you don't see this in the chat box, you are able to fill it out later. We do encourage you to do it right now, but you will receive an email from us to fill out this survey if you're not able to do it right now.
Yep.
Yeah, and just
Keep an eye out because we will be inviting you to the online classroom so you can rewatch this recording. Feel free to email us if you have any further questions on anything we covered today as well.
yeah, and then I just wanted to do a quick plug for our fertilizer workshop this Friday at 2 o'clock. If you're a Seminole County resident that has not yet received a free bag of fertilizer, register. I'm going to put it in the Q&A, and so click the link. It's Friday at 2 o'clock, and you can learn about fertilizer and get a free bag if you live in Seminole County.
All right. And thank you guys for joining us. I hope that you get to enjoy the rest of our presentations on fruit trees over the coming weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.